Have you ever stopped to think about how a simple decision can change an entire life in a matter of seconds? Shirley, at 78 years old, never imagined that standing on a stool to reach a bowl on the kitchen shelf could completely transform her reality. She was always one of those people who radiate energy, you know? The kind of woman who makes you forget that age exists. She walked around the neighborhood every morning, took care of her house alone, baked cakes for her grandchildren every week, and loved maintaining her independence above all else. "I don't need help," she used to say with a proud smile on her face. But on that ordinary Tuesday, something changed. The sun streamed through the kitchen window as Shirley prepared lunch, as she had done for decades in that same house where she raised her children. It was a routine, almost automatic movement. She stretched out her arm, lost her balance for a fraction of a second, and before she could grab onto anything, she felt her body plummet. The sound of the impact echoed through the empty house. The pain was immediate, intense, paralyzing. Stay with me until the end, because what happened after that will make you reflect on things you probably never considered before. Shirley tried to stand up, but her hips screamed with every movement. Have you ever been through that? That moment of panic when you realize something is seriously wrong with your body? She dragged herself to the phone, each inch feeling like an eternity, and managed to call her daughter. The ambulance arrived in 20 minutes, but to Shirley it felt like endless hours of pain and fear. At the hospital, the diagnosis came as a blow. Fractured hip. 3 words that sounded like a sentence for someone who had always valued her freedom. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because Shirley's story isn't just about a fall. It's about how a single instant can trigger a cascade of events that affect not only the person who fell, but an entire family. It's about decisions that need to be made in haste, about fears we never imagined facing, and about the true value of preparation. As Shirley waited on the stretcher, staring at the white hospital ceiling, thousands of thoughts raced through her head. How will I manage to dress myself and shower? Who will take care of my house? Will I become a burden to my family? These are questions no one wants to ask themselves, but they become urgent when independence is suddenly taken away from us. Shirley's daughter, Carol, arrived at the hospital terrified. She worked full-time, had 2 teenage children, and now needed to figure out how to care for her mother. The surgery was scheduled for the next day, but both knew the real challenge was only beginning. Recovering from a hip fracture in someone who is 78 years old is no simple task. Physical therapy, limitations in movement, risk of further falls, possible permanent loss of mobility. The statistics were not encouraging. But what Carol didn't yet know was that there was something that could have made all the difference in that situation. Something that would have transformed that moment of despair into a much smoother and safer transition. And before I tell you what saved Shirley and Carol's situation, subscribe to the channel and leave a like, because what you're about to discover in the next few minutes could make all the difference for you or someone you love. Let's go. Carol stayed by her mother's side all night in the hospital. The silence of that room was heavy, broken only by the beeps of the machines and Shirley's irregular breathing. The physical pain was evident, but something much deeper was happening there. In the eyes of that woman, who had always been so strong, Carol saw something she had never seen before: pure vulnerability. Shirley couldn't turn over in bed on her own. She needed help even to drink water. Every movement was a cruel reminder that her body, for the first time in 78 years, had failed her. You know that moment when you realize that everything can change in the blink of an eye? That's exactly what happened in that kitchen. A second of imbalance transformed an independent woman into someone completely dependent on others. And the scariest part? She hadn't done anything wrong. She wasn't taking unnecessary risks. She wasn't being reckless. It was just life being unpredictable, as it always is. The surgery took place the following morning, a 3-hour procedure to insert pins into the fractured hip. When Shirley awoke from the anesthesia, the reality began to unfold even more clearly. The doctor was blunt. Recovery would take months. Perhaps she would never be completely the same as before. Intensive physiotherapy, severe movement restrictions, a very high risk of further falls during the recovery period. And here is the hidden truth that no one tells you about hip fractures in the elderly. They are not just a physical problem. They are an emotional and psychological watershed. Shirley spent the next week in the hospital, and Carol had to make quick decisions. Hire a caregiver? Take her mother home? How to balance work, children, and intensive care. The impact of this fall wasn't just on Shirley's body. It was reverberating throughout the entire family structure. But it's never too late to recognize that preparation makes all the difference. Carol began researching, talking to social workers, and understanding options she didn't even know existed. What struck Carol most was seeing the transformation in her mother's spirit. Shirley, who had always been the family's strength, now felt like a burden. She would cry softly when she thought no one was watching. The journey of recovery wasn't just about bones healing. It was about rebuilding self-confidence, about accepting a new reality without losing hope. And it is precisely at this point that the story takes a turn that changed everything for them. What Carol discovered during that week was not just a practical solution, it was a revelation about how resources and support exist that can completely transform situations that seem impossible. What if fragility was just the beginning of a new strength? Comment below. Have you ever needed to start over after something that seemed to have completely broken you? It was on the third day of her hospitalization that the orthopedist entered the room with that serious demeanor doctors have when they have to deliver difficult news. Carol held her mother's hand while he explained the technical details of the fracture, but what truly stuck in their minds were his last words. "Shirley, you will need help for a long time. Your mobility may be permanently compromised. At your age, these fractures are quite complicated." The silence that followed was deafening. Those words fell like a definitive sentence on everything Shirley valued most in life, her independence. You know when you get news, and your whole world seems to collapse. Shirley didn't cry in front of the doctor, but Carol saw the sparkle in her mother's eyes dim a little more. 78 years of an active, vibrant, independent life, and now it all seemed to be coming to an abrupt and cruel end. The doctor continued talking about physiotherapy, home adaptations, possible complications, but Shirley was no longer there mentally. She was reliving all the mornings she woke up early to walk, all the cakes she baked alone in the kitchen, all the time she refused help because she wanted to prove she was still capable. The hidden truth about diagnoses like this is that they don't just affect the body, they attack a person's identity. Who was Shirley now? She was no longer the strong, independent woman everyone admired. She was someone who would need a cane, maybe a walker, maybe a wheelchair. She was someone who could no longer live alone, who would depend on others for basic tasks. And this transformation of identity, this forced journey towards a new version of herself, was far more painful than any physical fracture. Carol left her office that day and called her brother, who lived in another state. Through tears, she confided, "I don't know how we're going to do this. Mom is devastated. She doesn't want to be a burden to anyone, but she also can't go home alone." The decisions that needed to be made were enormous and urgent. Hire 24-hour caregivers, put her in a nursing home, renovate her mother's house to make it accessible? Each option seemed to bring more problems than solutions. But here's something fundamental that few realize. It's never too late to seek alternatives you didn't even know existed. It was during a conversation with the hospital's social worker that Carol first heard about something that would completely change the course of this story. There were programs, resources, and specific support for situations exactly like Shirley's. Things that could not only help with physical recovery but also preserve the dignity and quality of life she so deserved. Carol's mindset began to change. Instead of seeing it as an end, she started to see it as a challenging but possible new beginning. The impact of that conversation was immediate. There was hope beyond what the doctors had presented. There were paths that didn't involve institutionalizing her mother or destroying the family's financial structure. And most importantly, there were ways to give Shirley back some of the autonomy she thought she had lost forever. But what exactly did Carol discover that made all the difference? Well, this revelation changed not only Shirley's life, but the entire dynamic of how this family would face the challenges to come. The first few weeks at home were the hardest. Carol had turned the living room into a makeshift bedroom for her mother, since climbing stairs was out of the question. Shirley spent her days looking out the window, watching life go by outside while she remained trapped in that confined space. The physiotherapist came 3 times a week, but each session was a painful reminder of everything her body could no longer do. Movements that were once automatic now required monumental effort and caused intense pain. What no one tells you about this kind of situation is that grief doesn't only happen when someone dies. Shirley was grieving for the life she had before, for the woman she used to be. She would wake up in the middle of the night wanting to get up and make coffee as she always did, but reality would hit her again. She had to wait for someone to wake up to help her to the bathroom. The frustration turned into shame, and the shame into a deep sadness that seemed endless. Carol noticed not only the physical, but also the emotional transformation of her mother. Shirley, who had always been communicative and cheerful, now spent hours in silence. She refused visits from friends because she didn't want them to see her like that. When her grandchildren came, she forced a smile, but Carol saw in her mother's eyes that something fundamental had broken inside. Her dignity, that feeling of control over her own life, had been stolen in a single second of imbalance. Isolation crept in cruelly. Her friends would call inviting her for morning walks, but Shirley always made excuses. The truth is, she couldn't bear the idea of being seen with a walker, of being the person everyone would look at with pity. The craft group she'd been attending for 15 years, canceled indefinitely. The weekly trip to the market, where she chatted with everyone, now Carol did the shopping alone. The emotional journey of losing independence is something that cuts deep into anyone's soul, but especially someone who has built their entire identity around being strong and self-sufficient. Shirley began to question her own worth. If she could no longer do things on her own, if she was a burden to her daughter, what was her purpose? These silent questions consumed her during the long hours alone. Carol tried everything to cheer her mother up. She brought flowers, played music Shirley liked, talked about future plans, but the response was always the same: a distant look and a few empty words from someone who had already given up internally. The hidden truth about recoveries like this is that the body may heal, but the mind needs much more than medicine and physiotherapy. It was during one of those quiet afternoons that Carol realized something fundamental. It's never too late to rescue not only the body, but also the spirit. That conversation with the social worker began to make more and more sense. It wasn't just about physical care, but about giving her mother back a sense of purpose, of community, of a life worth living. And it was precisely in that moment of greatest darkness that a light began to appear on the horizon. What Carol was about to discover was not just practical support, but an entire philosophy of care that understood that aging with dignity goes far beyond medication and therapies. It was about reconnection, about finding new meaning, about transforming limitations into unexpected possibilities. Comment below. We need to talk more about the emotional health of the elderly. It was on a rainy Thursday that Margaret appeared at the door. Margaret had been Shirley's best friend for over 40 years, the kind of friendship that withstands everything and knows every scar on the soul. Carol opened the door in surprise because Shirley had insistently asked that no one come to visit her. But Margaret wasn't one to ask permission. She went straight into the makeshift room where Shirley spent her days, pulled up a chair, and sat down beside the bed without any ceremony. The initial silence was uncomfortable. Shirley turned her face away, embarrassed, but Margaret simply took her hand and said something no one had said before. "Do you think I came here out of pity for you? I came because I miss you, silly girl." There was no excessive drama, no false promises that everything would be all right. It was just the raw truth of someone who knows another person deeply and refuses to see them give up. Margaret began reminiscing about old stories. The time the two of them decided to learn salsa dancing at 60 and almost broke their necks in their first lesson. That winter, they got stuck in the snow and spent the whole night playing cards and laughing until their stomachs hurt. The crazy decisions they made together over the years. And then, amidst Shirley's shy laugh, Margaret uttered the phrase that would change everything. "Remember when you told me, after I lost Thomas, that life doesn't end when something important is gone, it just changes form? You believed in that so strongly that you made me believe it too. Where is that Shirley now?" The impact of those words was immediate. Shirley felt something stir within her, something that had been dormant for weeks. It wasn't exactly hope yet. It was more like a tiny spark trying to resist the wind. Margaret didn't leave with empty promises or forced optimism. She simply planted a seed of possibility. She showed Shirley that the journey wasn't over, only changed direction. And sometimes that's exactly what we need. Someone to remind us of who we were so we can imagine who we can still be. After Margaret left, Shirley spent a long time thinking. The rain beat against the window, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like just a spectator of her own life. She began to question her own narrative of defeat. Had she really lost everything? Or was she so focused on what she could no longer do that she forgot to see what was still possible? The transformation didn't happen instantly, but something fundamental had changed, her mindset. Carol noticed the difference the next day. Shirley asked for the curtains to be opened completely, something he had refused to do since arriving home. He inquired about his grandchildren with genuine interest. He even agreed to do the physiotherapy exercises without complaining. These were small signs, but important signs that perhaps, just perhaps, it's never too late to reclaim, not the old life, but to build a new one with the resources that still exist. Margaret's visit revealed something profound about human nature. Sometimes we don't need complex solutions. We just need someone to remind us of our own strength. But that spark needed fuel to turn into a flame. And it was precisely at that moment that Carol decided to act based on that conversation she had at the hospital. Carol took advantage of that subtle change in her mother and acted quickly. The following week, she implemented changes that seemed small, but carried enormous significance. First, she reorganized the space so that Shirley could reach her things without having to ask for help all the time. Books within easy reach, a remote control on a special stand, a small cart with water, and snacks. It seemed silly, but these micro-independences made a gigantic difference in Shirley's self-esteem. Physical therapy also took on a new meaning. Instead of being just a painful obligation, Shirley began to see it as her personal project of reconstruction. The therapist, noticing the change in attitude, started setting small, achievable goals. In the first week, Shirley managed to stand for 30 seconds without support. Does that seem like little? For someone who thought she would never stand alone again, it was a monumental victory. Carol took a picture and sent it to the whole family. The grandchildren sent enthusiastic messages, and Shirley, for the first time in months, smiled with that genuine sparkle in her eyes. But what truly marked this phase was Shirley's decision to genuinely accept help without shame or resistance. She realized that accepting support wasn't a sign of weakness, but rather an act of courage and wisdom. Carol hired a caregiver just for the mornings, and this decision lifted a huge weight off both of their shoulders. The caregiver, a woman named Rosa, had contagious energy and treated Shirley not as a fragile patient, but as a complete person, full of stories and potential. The transformation happened in the details. Shirley started getting ready in the morning again, even without leaving the house. She began choosing her own clothes, asking Rosa to do her favorite hairstyle. These things that seemed trivial are actually fundamental, pillars of our identity and dignity. Each small choice was an affirmation. I am still me. I still have a voice. I still matter. Daily challenges became rituals of overcoming. Walking to the bathroom with a walker became a reason for celebration. Managing to climb 3 steps with support was celebrated as if it were a marathon. And you know what? That's exactly how it should be. Because it's never too late to redefine what success and victory mean in your own life. For Shirley, at that moment, every movement was a declaration of war against resignation. Carol realized that the impact of these small achievements went far beyond the physical. Her mother once again had things to talk about. She regained her interest in the world around her. She asked Carol to read the news, commented on television programs, and offered opinions on decorating the house. Life was returning, not in the same way, but it was returning. And it was precisely at this point in her journey that Carol decided to take the next step, the one the social worker had mentioned, something that could not only maintain this progress, but amplify it in ways she hadn't even fully imagined yet. The hidden truth was about to be revealed in a practical and transformative way. What follows will show how informed decisions and adequate support can completely transform someone's trajectory, creating possibilities where previously there were only apparent limitations. It was on a Tuesday that everything took on a new dimension. Carol arrived home with a tablet under her arm and a smile on her face. Shirley looked suspicious because she had never been very tech-savvy, but Carol insisted, "Mom, I want to show you something." She set up the device, created some simple shortcuts, and opened up a world that Shirley didn't even know existed. There were online craft groups, live painting classes, virtual book clubs with people from all over the world. Suddenly, that room that seemed like a prison transformed into a gateway to endless possibilities. The first thing Shirley did was join an embroidery group. She had always loved embroidery, but had given it up years ago due to lack of time. Now, ironically, time was something she had plenty of. She started timidly, just observing, but within a few days, she was already sharing her own work and receiving compliments from people she had never met before. That ignited something fundamental, the feeling of belonging and purpose that she thought she had lost forever. But what really surprised everyone was when Shirley announced she wanted to learn Italian. That's right, Italian. At 78 years old, with limited mobility, she decided to fulfill a long-held dream she had always postponed because it wasn't practical or she didn't have time. Carol found live online classes, and Shirley enrolled with the enthusiasm of a teenager. The first lessons were challenging. She mixed up words and laughed at her own mistakes, but she was genuinely happy. The learning journey brought back that sparkle in her eyes that everyone thought had faded. The transformation was visible. Shirley woke up with purpose now. She had her Italian class at 9 in the morning, physiotherapy at 11, embroidery group in the afternoon, and in the evening, she usually participated in a virtual book club where they discussed literary classics. Her routine was fuller than when she could walk freely. And the most incredible thing, she was loving every second of it. Margaret returned to visit her and was impressed by the change. "You're different," she said, and Shirley responded with something profound. "I spent so much time mourning what I lost that I forgot to look at what I still have. My body has changed, but my mind is more alive than ever." This change in mindset was the real turning point. Shirley realized that there were millions of ways to live a full life, and some of them she had never explored precisely because she was too busy with her old life. The house began to fill with projects, embroidery scattered about, Italian books on the table, notebooks with recipe notes that she wanted to teach her grandchildren via video call. Shirley had become living proof that it's never too late to reinvent your life, to discover hidden talents, to build meaningful connections in entirely new ways. The impact on the family was immense. The grandchildren started calling more often because their grandmother always had interesting stories to tell. Carol realized that her mother was no longer a burden, but an inspiration. And Shirley? She finally understood that physical limitations don't define the size of her life. Her courage and creativity do. But there was still a crucial piece in this puzzle that made all the difference in allowing Shirley to explore this new world safely and calmly. Something that was operating behind the scenes, ensuring that she had not only emotional freedom, but also practical support to continue this incredible journey of starting over. What if true freedom wasn't about doing everything alone, but about having the right support to do what really matters? Write in the comments. What new talent would you like to develop? What took Shirley months to understand, but which completely changed her perspective, was that dependence and dignity are not opposites. Throughout her life, she had built her identity around being the strong person, the one who solved other people's problems, who never needed anything. But the fall forced a painful and liberating revelation. We all need help at some point, and recognizing that is actually an act of profound maturity. The transformation began when Shirley stopped apologizing every time she needed something. Before, every request was accompanied by, "Sorry to bother you," or, "I know you're busy." Carol noticed the change the day her mother simply said, "Carol, can you help me with this?" without any justification or apology afterward. It seemed small, but it was huge. Shirley was accepting her new reality without carrying guilt or shame along with it. But the most profound impact came in family relationships. The grandchildren, who previously only saw their grandmother at parties and Sunday lunches, now had a much deeper connection with her. Shirley taught her eldest granddaughter to embroider via video call. Her teenage grandson began helping her with the tablet, and in the process, the two discovered they had much more in common than they imagined. Shirley's vulnerability created bridges where before there had only been polite superficiality. Rosa, the caregiver, became much more than just someone hired for a service. She and Shirley developed a genuine friendship. They shared stories, laughed together, and Rosa often brought her own mother to visit them. The house that once seemed empty and silent now had life, conversations, real connections. Shirley realized something fundamental. By lowering her defenses and accepting help, she allowed people to truly enter her life in ways that had never happened before. The journey of accepting support also opened unexpected doors. Margaret began coming more often, and the two resumed those deep conversations they had when they were younger. They talked about life, about aging, about fears and hopes. Shirley discovered that many of her friends also faced health and mobility challenges, but no one spoke about them out of shame. She started creating an informal support group where women her age could share experiences without judgment. What became clear to Shirley is that it's never too late to redefine strength. Strength isn't just about doing everything alone. It's about having the courage to be honest about your limitations and still continue building a meaningful life. It's about transforming barriers into opportunities for connection. Every time she asked for help, she was actually offering someone the chance to be useful, to make a difference, to create deeper bonds. Carol watched all this with a mixture of relief and admiration. Her mother was no longer that distant, self-sufficient figure who never let anyone truly get close. Now she was a complete person, with weaknesses and strengths, capable of receiving and giving in equal measure. And that made all the difference, not only for Shirley, but for the entire family dynamic. But there was a practical element operating behind all this emotional and social transformation, something Carol had discovered in that initial conversation at the hospital, and which became the foundation that made all of this possible. Without this structural support, all of Shirley's courage and change of mindset would have encountered almost insurmountable practical barriers. 6 months after the fall, Shirley was unrecognizable, but not in the way anyone could have imagined on that terrible day in the hospital. She still used a walker, still had evident physical limitations, but there was something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, not even before the accident. It was a kind of peace mixed with enthusiasm, a rare combination that only those who have been through fire and chosen to rise from the ashes can carry. Shirley's routine now had a structure that made sense to her, not to the world. She woke up early, not because she had to, but because she wanted to make the most of every hour. She drank coffee while reviewing her Italian lessons, then participated in the online class where she could already hold basic conversations and made jokes that drew laughter from classmates scattered across several continents. Physical therapy continued 3 times a week, but now she saw each session as an investment in freedom, not as punishment. What truly marked the transformation was the renewed purpose she had found. Shirley started a personal project documenting family recipes in short videos. Her grandchildren loved them, and she discovered she had a knack for teaching. She created a small channel where she shared not only recipes, but stories about each dish, family memories, and life lessons she had learned. She didn't have thousands of followers, but she had an engaged community of people who truly cared about what she had to say. Margaret visited every week, and the two had resumed that old ritual of having tea and talking about everything. But now the conversations were different, deeper. They spoke honestly about aging, about fears and joys, about how strange and liberating it is at the same time to realize that life continues to surprise you even when you think you've seen it all. Shirley became a kind of informal mentor to other women her age who faced similar challenges. The impact on the family was visible. Carol no longer felt that weight of guilt and constant worry. Her mother was well, genuinely well, and this changed everyone's dynamic. The grandchildren began to see their grandmother as someone inspiring, not someone who needed pity. At family gatherings, Shirley was the center of attention again, but now by choice, sharing her learning adventures and her small daily triumphs. Shirley's journey proved something fundamental. Recovery isn't about going back to being who you were. It's about discovering who you can become with the resources you have now. She didn't regain the ability to walk without support, but she learned to dance sitting down during her Italian classes when the teacher played Italian music. She didn't fully regain mobility, but she found emotional and intellectual mobility that she might never have explored if life hadn't forced her to stop and reconsider everything. The sparkle in Shirley's eyes was different now. It was no longer the sparkle of someone who prided themselves on not needing anyone. It was the sparkle of someone who had learned that vulnerability and strength can coexist, that limitations can open unexpected doors, that it's never too late to build a life worth living, even if it's completely different from the one you planned. But there's something that needs to be said about what made all this possible behind the scenes, something practical, concrete, that served as the foundation upon which Shirley could build this entire rebirth. And that's what will make you understand why preparation and information make all the difference when facing crises that seem impossible to overcome. On a sunny afternoon, while recording yet another recipe video, Shirley paused for a moment and looked directly at the camera. There was something different in that look, a depth that came from someone who had truly lived, fallen, broken, and chosen to rebuild herself. She began to speak, but not about the recipe. She spoke about life. "You know," she said in that firm voice she had acquired over the months, "I spent 78 years thinking I knew who I was. And then, in a second, everything changed. At first, I thought my life was over. But the truth is, it was just beginning in a way I never imagined." The camera kept rolling as Shirley shared something she needed to say not only to the audience, but mainly to herself. We spend so much time trying to control every step, every direction, that we forget that life has its own plans. And when those plans take us off the path we were following, we think we've lost everything. But the hidden truth is that sometimes we need to lose our way to discover routes we would never have dared to explore. Shirley's reflection didn't come from self-help books or ready-made phrases someone told her. It came from each difficult day, each small victory, each moment when she had to choose between giving up or trying again. "I haven't gone back to being who I was," she continued. "And you know what? I don't want to go back." That Shirley was wonderful, but this one discovered things about herself that the other never had time to explore. "I learned Italian, created deeper connections with my family, discovered that I like to teach, that I like to learn, that I like to be vulnerable." The impact of those words was immediate. The video, which was supposed to be just about a family recipe, ended up being shared dozens of times. People of all ages commented, saying they needed to hear exactly that. Shirley had touched on something universal: the fear of change, the terror of losing control, the belief that there is only one right way to live. Carol watched the video with tears in her eyes. Her mother's transformation wasn't just physical or mental, it was spiritual. Shirley had found something many people search for their whole lives and never find: genuine peace with who she was, including all her limitations and possibilities. She wasn't feigning optimism. She wasn't denying the difficulties. She was simply living with authenticity and purpose. Margaret called right after seeing the video. "You know you've just become an example for everyone, right?" she said, laughing. But Shirley wasn't trying to be an example of anything. She was simply sharing her journey honestly. "Life doesn't end when paths change," she told Margaret on that call. "In fact, sometimes it's precisely in those forced detours that we find our best versions. I wouldn't have learned Italian if I hadn't broken my hip. I wouldn't have this deep relationship with my grandchildren. I wouldn't have discovered that I still had so much to offer and so much to learn." Shirley's mindset became contagious. Other people facing similar challenges began to reach out, sharing their own stories of starting over. And Shirley responded to everyone, creating a network of support and inspiration that extended far beyond herself. She proved that it's never too late to reframe your narrative, to transform a crisis into a catalyst for growth. But there's something that needs to be said with absolute clarity now. Behind all this emotional and psychological transformation, there was a practical support structure that made it all possible. And that structure began with that conversation at the hospital, with that information Carol received from the social worker, which completely changed the course of how they would face all of this. So, did you make it this far with me? I know it was an intense journey, but stories like Shirley's need to be told because they remind us of something fundamental. Life always gives us chances to start over, even when everything seems lost. And look, if this video touched you in any way, if you saw a piece of your story or the story of someone you love here, Leave a like to show me that this connection really happened. And subscribe to the channel too, because I'm here every week bringing you real stories, honest conversations about aging, health, family, and everything that really matters at this stage of life. It's not about giving ready-made solutions. It's about sharing experiences that can make a difference when you need them most. Oh, and write in the comments, I made it to the end and it was worth every second. I read them all, I swear. And I love knowing that there are people on the other side who are on this journey with me. There's a video over here that talks exactly about how to prepare for unexpected events, like what happened to Shirley, and I think you'll like it. Click and continue the conversation there, because it doesn't end here. Hugs, and see you in the next video.